There are moments in life that change everything, moments so horrifying, so incomprehensible, that they shatter the very foundation of what we believe to be true. On a quiet night in Riverdale, North Carolina, Michael and Alicia Henderson kissed their 2-year-old twins goodnight, unaware that it would be the last time they'd ever see their children the same way again. They had no reason to worry, no reason to fear. After all, their children were in good hands. Terrence Wallace wasn't just a friend. He was family. A man they had known for years. A man they had trusted with their lives, with their home, and most of all, with their children. But by the time the sun rose the next morning, the Hendersons would come face to face with a truth so horrifying, so impossible to accept, that their world would never be the same. Because inside that home, behind that front door, something was happening. Something that should never happen, and before the night was over, an unspeakable act of cruelty would unfold. A trusted family friend would be found. A 2-year-old child would suffer in ways no child should ever endure, and by the time authorities arrived, one person would be dead. To this day, those who were there struggle to talk about what they saw. Even the most seasoned investigators, the ones who thought they had seen it all, were left shaken. The crime scene would send a wave of horror through the town of Riverdale. Parents would clutch their children a little tighter. Doors that were once left unlocked would now remain bolted shut, and everyone who had known Terrence Wallace would be forced to ask the same terrifying question. How well do we know the people we trust? What happened inside that house? What could push a trusted friend to commit an act so monstrous? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, was this his first time? Stay with us as we uncover the shocking details of this case, the secrets that were buried, the evidence no one expected, and the final revelation that changed everything. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications, because this is a story you won't forget. Now, let's begin. In the heart of North Carolina lies the quiet town of Riverdale, a place where life moves at a slower pace, where neighbors greet each other by name, and where trust is the foundation of the community. It was the kind of town where you didn't just know your neighbors, you invited them into your home. Michael and Alicia Henderson were among the many families who had built their lives in Riverdale. High school sweethearts who had grown up just a few towns over had always dreamed of raising their children in a place where life was simple and safe. When their twins, Ella and Ethan, were born, that dream became a reality. Their days were filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and the endless energy that only 2-year-olds could bring. To their parents, Ella and Ethan were more than just their children. They were their entire world. And to Terrence Wallace, they were family. Terrence had been in the Hendersons' lives for years. He was more than just a friend, he was a constant presence. The kind of person who would show up at Sunday barbecues with an extra rack of ribs, who never forgot a birthday, and who always seemed to be around when they needed a hand. To the Hendersons, he was Uncle Terry. To the community, he was the man you could count on. No one questioned his kindness, no one second-guessed his intentions, and that's what made what happened next so unthinkable. Riverdale was the kind of town that people wrote about in small-town novels, lined with maple trees that turned brilliant shades of red and gold in the fall, with streets so quiet at night that you could hear the wind rustling through the leaves. At the edge of town, the Hendersons' home stood like a postcard. A modest but charming 2-story house with a white picket fence, a swing set in the backyard, and flower beds that Alicia tended to every morning. It was a home filled with warmth, laughter, with love. And yet, on one particular night, beneath that very roof, something would happen that would leave an entire town shaken. Because if you had asked anyone in Riverdale about the Henderson family, they would have told you the same thing. Michael and Alicia were good people, devoted parents, the kind of couple who had built their lives around their children. And if you had asked about Terrence Wallace, they would have said something even more certain. He was a man who would never hurt anyone. But they would have been wrong, because on that night, inside that house, something terrible happened. Something that should never happen. Something that would leave behind scars. ones that would never heal. How does a trusted friend become a monster? How does a night of routine and normalcy turn into an unthinkable tragedy? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, were there signs? Were there moments, small overlooked moments, where the truth was staring them in the face, waiting to be seen? What happened inside the Henderson home that night would become the kind of story whispered about in hushed tones. A story that would change everything the people of Riverdale thought they knew about trust, about safety, about the people they let into their lives. And by the time the night was over, one person would be dead, and the world, as the Hendersons knew it, would never be the same. It began with a phone call. Alicia Henderson was standing in the kitchen, scraping the last bits of mashed potatoes off Ella's high chair, when her phone buzzed on the counter. She wiped her hands, picked it up, and smiled when she saw the name on the screen. Terrence Wallace, the man she and Michael had trusted for years. He wasn't just a friend, the kind of person who would walk into their house without knocking, who knew where the spare key was hidden, who had spent more nights on their couch than she could count. "Take the night off," he said. "You and Michael deserve it. I'll watch the twins." It wasn't an unusual offer. Terrence had been babysitting for them since the twins were born. He knew their bedtime routine by heart. Bath at 7, pajamas by 7:30, a bedtime story before lights out. Alicia hesitated, glancing over at Michael, who was washing dishes at the sink. They hadn't had a night to themselves in months. The idea of dinner without the constant interruptions of two toddlers sounded nice. She looked at the twins, playing with their stuffed animals on the living room floor. Wouldn't it be good to have a few hours to breathe? Just a few. "Are you sure?" she asked. Terrence chuckled. "Come on, you know I love those kids. Go enjoy yourselves." So, at exactly 7:15 p.m., Alicia kissed Ella and Ethan goodnight, leaving them in the care of a man she would have trusted with her own life. At 7:30, she and Michael walked out the door, holding hands as they headed to their car. By 9:45, they would return home to a scene that would burn itself into their memory forever. The night started like any other. Dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. Michael ordered steak, Alicia had a salad. For the first time in what felt like forever, they talked about something other than potty training and grocery lists. But halfway through their meal, Alicia's stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. She glanced at her phone, no messages. Terrence always sent updates when he babysat. A picture of the twins asleep, a funny text about Ethan refusing to wear pajamas, something to let them know all was well. But tonight? Nothing. She tried to ignore it. Maybe they had gone to bed early. Maybe he didn't want to disturb them. But that feeling, that awful gnawing feeling, wouldn't go away. By 9:30, she put her fork down. "We should head home." Michael didn't argue. He had noticed the way she kept glancing at the time. He paid the check, and within minutes they were on the road. Neither of them knew what they were about to walk into. At exactly 9:45, they pulled into the driveway. The house was dark. Usually, Terrence would leave the porch light on for them. Usually, they'd see the faint glow of the living room lamp through the window. But tonight, the house sat in complete silence, its windows like black, empty eyes staring back at them. Alicia felt her pulse quicken. She glanced at Michael. "Something's wrong." They stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy. There were no cartoons playing in the background, no toddler giggles, no familiar hum of the baby monitor, just silence. And then Alicia saw the glass on the coffee table, a half-filled cup of water, the one she had left there before they went out. But next to it, a second glass, one she didn't recognize. The sight of it sent a chill through her. Terrence wasn't the type to leave drinks unfinished. He was always meticulous, always tidy. If he had poured himself a drink, he would have taken it to the kitchen. Alicia's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She called out his name, but nothing. Michael turned on the lights. The couch cushions were slightly askew. The remote lay on the floor. The baby monitor, which should have been on the end table, was missing. Alicia felt her breath catch. And then, a noise, a small whimper. From down the hall. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She rushed toward the twins' room, pushing the door open, and froze. Ella and Ethan were huddled together in the corner of their crib, their tiny arms wrapped around each other. Their faces were streaked with tears, their pajamas twisted and rumpled as if they had struggled, and their skin. Alicia's stomach lurched. Bruises, dark, ugly marks covered their arms, their legs. Ethan's cheek was swollen. Ella's lip was trembling. Michael's voice was shaking as he stepped into the room. "Oh my God." Alicia's knees buckled. She reached for them, scooping them into her arms, their small bodies trembling against her chest. She could barely speak, barely breathe. "Where's Terrence?" Michael turned back toward the hallway, his body tense. "Terrence!" he shouted. No answer. He moved through the house, checking every room, flinging open closets, looking under beds. But the house was empty. Then he saw it, the back door, wide open. The night air crept in through the screen, rustling the curtains. Terrence was gone. What happened in the last 2 hours? What had Terrence done? And the most terrifying question of all, where was he now? Because as Alicia cradled her children, rocking them, whispering to them that they were safe, she knew one thing for certain: they weren't, because somewhere out there, in the darkness, Terrence Wallace was still free, and this nightmare was only beginning. Riverdale wasn't the kind of town that made the news. It was a quiet place. Family cookouts on the weekends, neighbors who watched each other's kids, front porches filled with laughter as the sun set over tree-lined streets. The kind of town where people left their doors unlocked, where nothing ever happened. Until now. Now, police tape stretched across the Hendersons' front door. Flashing lights bathed the street in an eerie blue glow. The hum of radio chatter filled the night as officers moved in and out of the house, their faces grim, their voices hushed. The news had spread fast. Something had happened, something terrible. But no one wanted to believe it, because the name tied to this crime, the person responsible for the nightmare that had unfolded behind those doors, was someone they all knew. Someone they trusted. Terrence Wallace. When the Hendersons dialed 911, it wasn't just a call for help. It was a desperate plea for answers. Who had hurt their children? Where was Terrence? Why had he vanished? Paramedics arrived first. They rushed in, finding Ella and Ethan in their cribs, their small bodies covered in bruises. Their tiny faces were streaked with tears. Their eyes were wide with terror. The twins were too young to understand what had happened. But they knew one thing: they were afraid. And that fear was enough to make even the most hardened officers pause. Within minutes, the house became a crime scene. Evidence markers lined the floor. Photographers captured every detail. Detectives combed through the Hendersons' home, looking for anything, any clue that might explain what had happened. And then, they found something. Something that changed everything. Michael Henderson had installed a security camera in the living room months ago. Just a precaution, a way to keep an eye on things when they weren't home. He had almost forgotten about it. Until now, the detectives pulled the footage, fast-forwarding to the moment they had left for dinner. There he was, Terrence Wallace, pacing the living room, rubbing his hands together, restless. Then, he turned, looked down the hallway, and everything changed. The video showed Terrence stepping into the twins' room. At first he spoke softly. His voice was gentle, reassuring. But then, something snapped. He grabbed Ethan first, yanked him from the crib. The toddler let out a startled cry, his little legs kicking as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Then, a slap, hard, sharp, echoing through the room. Ella screamed. Terrence turned on her next. And what happened next made even the most experienced detectives sick to their stomachs. He wasn't just hurting them, he was enjoying it. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the video cut to static. Terrence was gone. But he hadn't been left alone. Detectives reviewed surveillance footage from a nearby shop, taken just after the Hendersons left for dinner. 8:52 p.m., Terrence Wallace walking inside. Calm, collected, buying a pack of bottled water, some snacks, and something else. Duct tape. Then, instead of getting into his car, he walked around the corner and stepped into a waiting vehicle. A dark sedan, tinted windows, engine running. Someone was waiting for him. Someone was in on this. The detectives ran the license plate, and when the results came back, they couldn't believe it, because the car didn't belong to Terrence Wallace. It belonged to someone else, someone the Hendersons knew. And when they learned who, the entire case took a devastating turn. Terrence Wallace had been a trusted friend, a familiar face, someone who had shared meals with the Hendersons, played with their children, laughed in their home. But now, he was a fugitive. And as investigators dug deeper into his past, they uncovered something that no one in Riverdale could have ever imagined. This wasn't the first time. This wasn't an isolated incident. Terrence Wallace had done this before. Detectives traced his history, running his name through national databases. At first, nothing stood out. No outstanding warrants, no charges in North Carolina. But then, a hit. Out-of-state records. A different name. Terrence Wallace had been arrested before, and the details of that case sent a shudder through the entire department. 8 years ago, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a family reported their babysitter, a close friend, had harmed their 3-year-old son while they were away. The child had been found in his crib with bruises on his arms and legs, terrified and unable to explain what had happened. The babysitter? Terrence Wallace. But back then there had been no cameras, no physical evidence strong enough to hold him. The case had been dismissed, ruled as a possible accident. The family had moved on. Terrence had moved away, and now years later he had resurfaced in Riverdale with the Henderson twins. As the news spread, another family came forward, the Callahans. They had lived in Riverdale for years, just a few streets away from the Hendersons. They had also trusted Terrence, let him into their home, let him near their children, and suddenly, memories they had long buried came rushing back. Their son, Malik, had been 3 years old at the time. Terrence had babysat him once, just once. When they came home, Malik was crying. He couldn't explain why. Terrence had told them the boy had fallen, hit his knee. Nothing serious, and they had believed him. Now, hearing what had happened to the Henderson twins, their stomachs turned. Had Malik been hurt too? Had Terrence done something to him? They would never know for sure, but one thing was clear. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a one-time crime. This was a pattern, and Terrence Wallace had perfected it. But what detectives found inside Terrence's house turned the case from horrifying to something much, much worse. His home was small, barely furnished, just the basics: a couch, a bed, a kitchen table. But in the back of the house, in a locked room, they found something that made their blood run cold. A collection of photographs, stacks of them. Images of children. Not just the Henderson twins, but other kids. Kids from Riverdale, kids from other towns. Some were pictures taken at the park, others outside daycares. All of them had something in common. They were all children Terrence had been watching. And next to the photographs, a journal. Page after page of handwritten notes, thoughts, plans, descriptions of the Henderson twins, how long he had been watching them, what he had wanted to do, and an entry dated just 2 nights before the incident. They trust me, they'll never see it coming. The community had trusted Terrence Wallace. The Hendersons had trusted him with their children. Now, looking at the evidence spread out before them, it became terrifyingly clear. Terrence Wallace hadn't just been a friend. He had been hunting, and the Henderson twins had been his prey. With the horrifying evidence stacked against him, there was no doubt Terrence Wallace needed to be caught. But there was just one problem. He was gone, and the person who had helped him escape was still out there. Terrence Wallace had disappeared, but he wasn't free. Law enforcement had locked down every possible escape route. Highways were swarming with patrol cars. Officers combed through bus stations, abandoned buildings, even storm drains. A man like Terrence couldn't vanish. He wasn't a ghost. He was a man on borrowed time. Then the break came. Traffic camera footage from the outskirts of Riverdale showed him on foot, Slipping between buildings in an industrial zone near the train yards, authorities moved fast. A full tactical unit was deployed, sweeping through the warehouses one by one. The scent of rust and oil filled the air. The only sounds? Distant train whistles and the slow drip of leaking pipes. Then, movement. A shadow darting between old shipping containers. Officers closed in, their weapons drawn. "Step out, Terrence! Hands where we can see them!" Silence. Then, from the darkness, laughter. Not frantic, not panicked, calm, almost entertained. Then, the voice came. "You people think you're heroes, don't you? You don't understand. They're the ones who turned on me. I would have done anything for that family. Anything." A flash of movement. Terrence bolted. He made it 10 feet before being tackled to the ground. He fought, thrashing, screaming Michael Henderson's name over and over, as if blaming the man whose children he had hurt. It took 4 officers to restrain him. Even as they dragged him away, he kept repeating the same thing. "There was family. I was family." The evidence was airtight. The courtroom was packed, the tension thick enough to suffocate. Every gruesome detail came to light: the photographs, the journals, the footage. Michael and Alicia Henderson sat in silence as their former friend was exposed for who he truly was. It took the jury less than 3 hours. Guilty, on all counts, life in prison, no parole. As the verdict was read, Terrence showed no emotion, no remorse. But as the guards led him away, he turned to Alicia, and with a smirk, he mouthed 2 words. "You're welcome." Riverdale would never be the same. The town where doors were once left unlocked no longer felt safe. Parents became more cautious, no longer trusting old friends with their children. And Michael and Alicia, they moved away. They never spoke Terrence Wallace's name again. But the scars, both seen and unseen, would never fade. Some crimes shock, some devastate. But then, there are crimes like this. Crimes that leave an entire community looking over their shoulders and questioning the very people they once trusted. Terrence Wallace was not a masked stranger lurking in the shadows. He wasn't some unknown predator stalking from a distance. He was in their homes. He was at their dinner tables. He was the Uncle Terry who played with the Henderson twins, who laughed with their parents, who shared meals, birthdays, and holidays. And yet, behind that friendly smile, behind the warmth in his voice, something else existed. Something no one saw until it was too late. Michael and Alicia Henderson did everything right. They trusted a friend, a man they had known for years, a man their children loved. But trust can be the most dangerous weapon of all. After this case, nothing in Riverdale was ever the same. Babysitters were no longer hired through friends. Parents installed cameras inside their own homes. Neighbors who once waved at each other from their porches now kept their distance, eyes filled with quiet suspicion. And who could blame them? Because if a man like Terrence Wallace could betray the Hendersons, what did that say about the people we let into our own lives? What do you think about this horrifying case? Do you believe Terrence planned this all along, or was there something deeper that pushed him to commit such an unthinkable act? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this case disturbing, remember, there are more stories like this, stories of trust turned to terror, of friends who become nightmares. So, if you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we have more cases to uncover, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay aware, stay cautious, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who already have a key to your front door. This is The Dark Side, True Crime, and we'll see you in the next case.